This is the E-Commerce Edge podcast with your host, Jason Greenwood. Incredible episode of the E-Commerce Edge podcast. I have an incredible guest lined up for you today. We're going to talk about something that I don't think we've ever featured on the podcast before, which is hardware technology for the retail space. But before we get into that, and before I introduce my guest, I would love to encourage you to go and like, subscribe, and share on your favorite podcast platform. We rely on you to share our incredible content far and wide. We don't have a marketing team. We don't have a marketing budget. You are our marketing team. We have over 450 episodes in our back catalog of the podcast for you to select from. So please like, share, and really, we just really encourage you to take on board all of the incredible learnings that our incredible guests have brought to you over the last 3+ years. But without further ado, it is my absolute pleasure to welcome Naman Push from Airbound. Welcome, Naman.
Hey, Jason. Yeah, really glad we could find the time and, lovely to be on your podcast.
Thank you so much. And as I pointed out, we have never featured any kind of hardware technology like you on the podcast before. We normally, we release 3 episodes a week. We have a Monday mentorship episode. We have a Wednesday B2B focused episode. And then our Friday episode is our tech episode. And we normally feature, retail, e-commerce, omni-channel, digital retail tech, and kind of connected retail tech we oftentimes feature on the podcast as well. But we've never featured any kind of drone technology, automated delivery technology. We've never featured that on the podcast before. But before we get into that, and before we get into what Airbound is and does, how the heck did you even come to be involved in this industry in the first place?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very weird story. The short answer I like to give is that I was just really bored during COVID. I think but it honestly was that, right? I think everyone had a crazy amount of free time during COVID, and it was the same story with me. I was really interested in, working on something that could be interesting. I wanted some kind of long-term project that was more than, just your typical resume padding that most people do. And yeah, I think there's a lot of communities that were formed around that period where you had a bunch of engineers all around the world really coming together, trying to spend this free time to work on projects that could make a difference. So I got really interested in that. I helped out with a couple of projects, and it's sort of that helped give me the confidence that, hey, maybe I can start something on my own. Maybe I can, leverage these communities. Who knows, right? Worth giving it a shot. And so that's kind of how I got into the space. I think as for my drone delivery specifically, I think that's something where, frankly, I had zero interest in the space at first, especially when you heard a lot about, Amazon's programs and all. It bored me quite a bit. But I think when you see the new wave of drone delivery, companies like Zipline, Wing, etc., you kind of see drone delivery in a whole new light, right? I think especially with Zipline, as they were doing a lot of blood delivery, a lot of other kinds of logistics, you realize that drone delivery is not about people getting the Amazon packages faster. Drone delivery is about access. It's about, right now, the way logistics is done, the way you have, your whole hub and spoke model. It's something that needs very dense neighborhoods to be able to work. And so the moment you go to more rural places, cost of delivery shoots up. And that just makes access to resources a much more difficult problem. And so that's something that, I think is really worth solving. I think, the huge cost in the last mile is something that's really worth solving. It's kind of crazy that, in basically the past century, there's been zero innovation on the last mile. It's still like a guy in a vehicle delivering you a thing, right? The most radical thing that happened there is sometimes the guy's like carrying packages for multiple people and you're just one stop among many, which I don't know, to me, it's kind of depressing that is the biggest innovation in the space.
Yeah, and look, you're very young, right? Like this was your first major project out of uni, right?
Yeah, I mean, I actually never went to university, so I started working on this while I was in high school,
Wow.
and yeah, and things went well. I mean, a lot of folks with Asian parents will know how it is. It was a challenge convincing convincing parents to like not go to university. There was no way in hell I was dropping out of high school. That was
Yeah.
off the table. But I think like thankfully they were able to kind of understand my perspective a lot. And I mean their perspective was also that like, hey, you get funding, you get some kind of traction while you're still in school, then we can think about it. It's not something where it makes sense to just blindly take that leap of faith. And the good thing is we did do that, managed to raise a couple of small funding rounds while I was still in school. And that went a long way.
Wow, incredible. Well, I love that. And as a husband of an Asian wife, I can tell you I deeply understand the Asian approach to university and further education, tertiary education. I get it, and as someone who has many, many Asian friends, I totally get that. But as someone who personally did not go to university either, and who built their entire career outside of university, autodidactic learning, I never, I did well in high school. I graduated with a B plus average out of high school, but I was never really the academic type. That was never really my thing. And so I can definitely, I've got empathy for the situation you found yourself in from both perspectives. The family pressure, but also wanting to do your own thing. I get both sides of that coin, but I'm really excited to hear that you were able to get some funding. And actually, according to Crunchbase, in total now you've had around US $1.7 million in total funding. Is that roughly accurate?
Yeah, that's about there. So we'd raised some small rounds early on while I was still in school, like, 25K, 200K and all, which is like in the startup world, not big amounts of money, but I think
It's
for us,
decent seed. It's a decent seed round, right?
exactly. Exactly. It was a decent starting point. And, I think especially for my parents, like seeing that like they were giving 16 or 17-year-old that kind of cash was like,
Yeah.
damn, maybe he is doing something right. And yeah, I think sort of after, obviously things were able to accelerate a lot after I graduated, after I was able to work full time on this. I mean, you can put in hours. I think I found great ways to put in hours even while I was dealing with school in parallel, especially with online school. It was really easy. I would just angle my camera up a lot, and then I would just be like sanding down parts, working on my molds, doing like the hardware work underneath the camera where my teachers couldn't see it. But
Wow.
the reality is like, you know, especially if you want to go to like managing a team, dealing with sort of an office space, all of that stuff, you can't be doing that when you're managing school at the same time. It's not possible. And so that's something where, you know, really, really was able to move a lot faster once I graduated.
Love it. Love it. Now, I used to fly radio controlled helicopters competitively in my younger years. I used to build them, used to fly them, used to compete with them. And one of the things that probably the single biggest change that happened to the RC helicopter industry in my time, because I was in the space for 10, 15 years, and there was probably two massive changes that happened to the industry. One is the cost came down dramatically on RC helicopter technology. The second biggest change was simulators, where you could plug your radio into your laptop and you could actually practice via simulator, which historically it was very expensive to learn because you'd crash a lot. And then the
Mhm.
third major change that happened was headless, flybarless, three-axis gyro technology. Like that was game changing. Like once you had three-axis gyros, so that you no longer had to have a flybar, and you had full tail rotor control and everything all through the one gyro system. It was
Mhm.
it was game changing technology, right? And when
Mhm.
that technology first came out, it was very expensive. Like a three-axis gyro was like 2 grand USD when it first came out, and now you can get them. Now you can get them for like you can get them for a couple $100 now, even less.
Mhm.
And so I'm guessing, like what, and we'll get into your tech specifically, but I'm guessing that all of these advances in
Mhm.
RC planes, RC helicopters, DJI drone technology, photo drone, video drone technology, autonomous flight capabilities. I'm guessing that advances in all of these technologies related to flight, they have significantly brought down, I guess, instead of having to design absolutely everything from scratch, including all of your flight control systems and absolutely
Yeah.
everything, there are more off the shelf base components to start with than there ever were before. And it feels like a confluence of events. One, rising cost of delivery, especially the
Mhm.
rising cost of delivery to rural and outlying areas. I think that's the first thing. COVID and many more people buying online and expecting
Mhm.
delivery as opposed to going to retail stores, combined with the advances in technology and the expectation that, self-driving cars are going to become a thing, drone technology is a thing. I guess it feels like a whole lot of things had to come together at the same time to create a realistic business opportunity for you.
Yeah, definitely. I think a lot of this also really, like you said, came down to the development of technology. I think, the kind of business we're in, it's a bit of an interesting one, right? Especially when you go quite on the deep tech side, where I think like a lot of companies are really waiting for the tech to come and then they build on top of the tech. But I think when the market opportunity is just so very high, you can kind of skip that process. You can say, hey, we're not going to wait for the tech to fully develop. We're going to fully develop it ourselves. And I think that's where it's really important to understand what are like the core areas of your technology? What are the major things that will make the difference? And what are the things that are not that important? Because frankly, you can't be innovating on everything. And I think that's where, innovations in flight controllers, in sort of all of the electronic systems helped a lot. Because the reality is that with a delivery system, what really matters is the operating cost of your aircraft. What matters is like what's going to be the, flight efficiency, what's your lift to drag ratio going to be like, what is the overall weight of your aircraft. And these things have nothing to do with the flight controller. Yes, a good flight controller, well-written code can help improve the efficiency, especially if you're doing autonomous flight. But it's only going to improve it by percentage points. It's not going to improve it by like an order of magnitude. So that's why it really helps that, we had these systems to already like push off of so that we could focus all of our work on really innovating with the hardware, with manufacturing, with everything there, so that we can just create a system that has a dramatically lower cost of delivery, a dramatically higher speed, much more safety, much lower noise.
Yeah, and look, I think the other thing that you have been able to innovate on, at least as far as I can tell, and I'm by no means an expert in your space, but at least as far as I can tell, moving to almost like an Osprey type of a model, it's not exactly like an Osprey because it's not a tilt wing, but the fact
Mhm.
that you are, through the fact that you have more of a fixed, it's a combination of flight modes, right? You've got fixed wing
Yes.
flight mode, and then you've got hover flight mode, and obviously hover flight mode requires a lot more energy and a lot more power than fixed wing flight mode. And I think that you have overcome some of the range challenges by adapting and combining fixed wing and hover flight mode into the same aircraft, whilst also keeping the design supremely simple. So I love the fact that it's effectively a plane when it's going over a long distance, and then when it's doing the actual delivery part, then it flips effectively almost into a hover, almost like a helicopter mode, like a drone, a
Yeah.
rotorcraft mode, and then you're benefiting from the ability to be in a hover when you're in delivery mode, but when you're actually trying to traverse long distances, you benefit from fixed wing aircraft efficiency. And so I love the fact that you've done that. Are you, as far as you're aware, are you the first designers of this type of technology that have gone this route, as opposed to being full-blown rotorcraft drone tech, which has severe efficiency
Mhm.
challenges associated with it and noise challenges?
Yeah, definitely. I think the problem that you're kind of getting to here is like what in the industry is like the whole VTOL problem. I'm not sure if you, yeah,
Vertical
so
takeoff and landing
uh,
challenge.
exactly, right? And I mean, it's to me when I first like heard about VTOL as a term, I was very confused because I'm like, aren't all drones VTOL, right? Like your DJI quads and all, they're all VTOL. But that's the thing, like you have very weird naming conventions because VTOL, even though it just stands for vertical takeoff and landing, effectively what you mean is a fixed wing aircraft, a plane style aircraft that does vertical takeoff and landing. Quadcopters don't really count as VTOL. So yeah, exactly. So weird naming conventions aside, that's what like everyone in the industry is trying to get at. It's that how do we get that efficiency of a plane while still doing VTOL? And right now, VTOL is something that comes with a crazy amount of compromises. The most popular architecture that you see is the whole quad plane design, where you essentially it's like an aircraft with a bunch of propellers on top. And those, well, extra motors, extra propellers add a crazy amount of weight. They add a crazy amount of drag. They interfere with lift generation. Your efficiencies just go down massively when you add a system like that. And so it's I don't know, to me it felt like very inelegant design. I think, we're really a team of hardcore engineers. And so we care a lot about efficiency and all of these things. It kind of felt wrong to go down that design path, to put it bluntly. So that's why what we built, it's called a tail sitter. We're not the first people in the world to create a tail sitter, but it's a really interesting architecture where the entire aircraft rotates. So that means you get your maximum efficiency during forward flight, which is what you're going to be spending most. So that's the really cool part of the flight journey. And there's a lot of major challenges you have to solve there. We also decided to combine this with, blended wing body design. So this is kind of a type of design that was popularized by Boeing. There was a very famous paper that came out in 2004 by Liebeck that was basically talks through the whole design process of a blended wing body. The TLDR is basically that this is just a more efficient way to create passenger planes compared to, the tube and wing that we're working with today. So the big challenge we saw with tail sitters is that just because of the requirements of a tail sitter, you have to compromise a lot of things in the design. So yes, even though it's still in theory just as efficient in fixed wing, because so much needs to change around the shape, there's so many restrictions around it, you don't get a pretty good like lift to drag ratio with it. And so lift to drag ratio is basically just a measure of aerodynamic efficiency, right? If I double my lift to drag ratio, I double my efficiency, I need to use half the energy to go the same distance. So it's a very, very important number. And yeah, so that's there. We kind of saw that like right now your quad plane designs and all, they have a lift to drag ratio of like 3 and 3.5 at most. Whereas your planes, your airliners have like 17 to 20, right? And a blended wing body has around 24 plus. So we were just like, why not go for that side, right? Like, why can't we do that? Let's take those designs, let's make that work with VTOL, because then you're basically 5-6xing,
Your
the
range
efficiency.
and your
Yeah,
payload carrying capability.
exactly, right. And all of those things, it becomes cascading effects, right? Because let's say if I have a better lift to drag ratio, I need a smaller battery. Because I have a smaller battery, I can get away with using smaller motors and a lighter structure, which in turn means I need a smaller battery. So it's basically you have a lot of positive feedback loops in the design process. And more often than not, this works against you because, you know, as design inefficiencies happen, they compound. But that also means that design efficiencies compound as well. So you make a small improvement that becomes a big improvement. Uh, and that's what we realized. We're making like, let's say, roughly 5 to 6x improvement in aerodynamics. We're making like a 7x improvement in structural weight. But what that translates into is 137x improvement in cost.
Wow, incredible. And I guess one of the benefits of your multi-rotor drone is the fact that you effectively have backup rotors if one or two failed, and you can still land the aircraft, etc. With yours, you've got two motors at the front of the fixed wing. I'm guessing that you have like a ballistic parachute or something like that. If we have failures, then you've effectively got a scenario where it's not going to come crashing down to the ground with 5 kilos worth of weight in it and kill someone. So I'm guessing, but there's that kind of dead man's curve point as well, where there's not sufficient height to deploy a ballistic parachute. There's all these considerations, and I think that's what it feels like. Safety and noise are the two single biggest issues that regulators seem to be
Mhm.
grappling with the world over. They're saying we don't want a million drones in our skies making all this racket. We've got jetliners, but they're flying at like 30,000 feet, and so therefore we don't have apart from takeoff and landing, we don't really have a major noise issue. We don't have we've largely overcome the safety issues with commercial flight, but we've still got the safety and noise issues involved in most major drone technology. So how do you see, well, I guess the first question is, how is drone regulation affecting you now? And how do you see drone regulation evolving over the next few years to be able to accommodate newer designs and newer types of technology like yours?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think safety and noise are two very, very critical points. and sort of, I think we can address noise first, since that's a much simpler and easier point, right? What exactly is noise? Why do you get noise from your propellers? Noise is largely a function of propeller size and propeller RPMs, right? And this essentially, what this boils down to in terms of conclusions you can make about noise is if two drones have the same amount of propellers, the lighter drone will make less noise. And if two drones are the same weight, the drone with fewer propellers will make less noise. And so we have a drone with fewer propellers and high efficiency than any other delivery drone. And most importantly, we have a drone that is really, really light. Our drone in total with payload and everything is 2.5 kilograms, right? That is more than 10 times
Insanely
lighter than
light.
exactly. So the thing is that if this drone is really, it's built to fall like a feather. It's really interesting. If you sort of see, some of our crashes, more often than not, the drone kind of just spirals down. So
Yeah.
it picks up a lot of drag in the air. It doesn't come down like a stone. Again, aerodynamic efficiencies help a lot there. We obviously do have a parachute system, and that is really, really important for sort of when you're doing ops high in the sky. Another thing is, yeah, sorry, around noise as well. The thing is, once the aircraft sort of transitions into the sky, right, once it goes into its fixed wing flight, it's literally physically impossible to hear it. Yeah, so you absolutely cannot hear the aircraft if it's flying over you. The only people that are hearing it are going to be the people receiving the delivery. And even then, you're hearing it for like 30 seconds. It's a lot quieter than a car passing down the road. It's something that like people are fairly, at least our thesis is that people are fairly accepting of. I think, generally, if you look at how drone delivery programs have gone, people have tolerated a lot more noise and still been happy with it. So that's really important. That's something that, we focused a lot on. Low weight obviously helps a crazy amount with safety. It also means that, you can deploy your parachutes faster. The other thing is your operations matter a lot, right? The core idea is that these drones will only be taking off and landing at designated hub areas. And those are spots where we are going to be keeping clear of humans. We are going to be keeping the drone in our control, because that is the highest risk part of operations, right? We've never had a drone crash while in fixed wing flight. So, as long as you ensure that whenever the drone is outside of your realm of control, you're dealing with very safe operations where you are sort of high enough that parachute can manage a lot of different things, then that drastically helps you improve safety.
Wow. And I see from the photos on your website that in tail sitter mode, effectively the parcel container is on a cable, right? And I'm guessing it's just it's a servo drop technology that just drops the cable, I guess, based on servo tech. And then so at no point during the delivery does this thing actually land, correct? Because it doesn't appear to have
Absolutely.
actual landing
Yes.
gear.
So the drone does land, but yeah, definitely not during a delivery, right?
Yes.
Because the thing is, if your drone lands during a delivery, so many things can go wrong, right? I mean, someone can just grab the drone,
Feel it,
someone can
whatever.
exactly, or someone can get hurt by the drone, right? Moving propellers are inherently dangerous, so
Yes.
you're presenting a safety risk. It's a liability for the company. It's just like people don't know how to deal with the drone, right? So many things can go wrong. So I just there's absolutely no world where we think that drone delivery can scale if a drone has to land at the drop-off location. Unless this is like strictly B2B deliveries where everyone knows what's going on and they build on landing pads and everything.
Yes. Yes. And so it is the expectation that the customer will actually have to be there to receive the delivery, or will it just effectively drop it on the ground near the domicile, the house, the building, whatever it is, near the front door, whatever it is? I guess, is there some sort of machine vision technology involved there to where it can detect where the front of a dwelling is or where the door of a dwelling is or something like that, where it knows, okay, cool, this is the front door of a house, we're gonna land it by the front steps, or like, I'm guessing there is some sort of vision technology involved here to know where is a safe place, making sure we're not going to drop it on a dog, making sure we're not going to drop it on a kid that's out front of a house. There's so many scenarios where
Mhm.
you kind of have to deal with 1,000 different unique scenarios upon delivery from a safety perspective. How do you deal
Yeah.
with all those?
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's where, to your point, I would say safety is a lot more important than autonomy. I think autonomy is one of those things that you can always get as data scales. And, let's say as we do millions of flights, as we get data on, millions of front porches, then it becomes a lot easier to train a high quality model on this. But our approach is always going to be slow to autonomy because what is far more important is that you maybe spend that extra cash on every delivery and have a real person that is checking to ensure that you're dropping this off at a safe zone. So that, yeah, I mean, you don't want those crazy incidents happening early on where, something goes wrong or, it drops the delivery in a crazy place or it just like leaves it on top of a tree or whatever, because I mean, obviously people aren't going to be happy. I think other things also help a lot with this just because, you have limited control, you're focusing on fairly light payloads, fairly low, speed things. So this is not like a falling object that can hit and hurt someone, right? It's
Yeah.
coming down very, very gently. It does not have the capacity to hurt anyone or anything. And it simply just, automatically unlatches. So all of those things become really important. We're creating a gentle delivery experience. There's no risk of, this hurting someone. You're creating a good quality delivery experience, right? You don't want this to, land up in the pool or something, and you're creating like a reliable delivery experience, right? You can consistently expect that if you order something by drone, these items come in. And I think all three are really, really important because those are the big barriers to adoption. And if you can't solve all of them, then I mean you have scale drone delivery on your hands.
And so, as part of phase one, it is your vision that there will actually be a remote drone operator, and will they operate from takeoff to return to base, or will they only manage takeoffs, deliveries, and then in free, forward flight that's following a fixed flight path, it'll be autonomous. What is your vision for the level of human interaction required, at least as part of phase one of the deployment of this technology?
Definitely. So, I mean, especially since you've been a lot in the RC space, I think you know that like automations these days are like quite a commonplace thing. You have a lot of hobbies also doing automations,
Yes.
which is great. That tech has developed a lot. And the great thing is that just doing an automation where I'm saying you do a flight, let's say takeoff, transition, back transition, take up, transition, flight to destination, back transition, drop the payload, transition back, return to homeland. That is a fairly easy thing to do. There's not really much technical complexity in there. And we've done our share of autonomous missions. But, the challenge is obviously in what parts are tricky, what parts require that human intervention. And so the way we see it is that in the early scaling days, the two major parts where we would need human intervention. One is that you would need ground support stuff for takeoff and landing. So doing all the pre-flight checks on the drone, ensuring everything is calibrated properly, that's really, really important. And that will be manual until you scale operations a bit further. And, number two is specifically the drop off, right? So specifically the drop off where, I mean, you have all the cameras and the sensors needed. So it's very easy for someone to just like click on a point in the screen and for the drone to send itself to that point. And the idea is that, again, as you build enough data on this, eventually the drone's going to figure out that point itself. Maybe, the next phase, the drone gives a couple of candidate points and, the operator just picks one of them. And, the layer after that is where, the drone is just doing things itself. And, you just have an observer that is going to correct the drone if it's doing something wrong. And that's how you can really have this staggered approach to autonomy, where it doesn't have to be like this binary on off switch where, either it's fully autonomous or it's not. No, it's a gradual curve that, we will be going through. But it's clear that there is a road to autonomy.
And do you envisage that, first of all, I guess, A, do you have any existing customers for the technology or people signed up to be customers of technology when it's sufficiently developed to be a production product? Or how close you are? I guess the first question is, how close are you to production? Do you have customers that are already interested in the technology? And do you think that your customers will ultimately be the major carrier providers like your FedEx's, UPS's, USPS's, or are they going to be smaller local carriers? Are they going to be individual retailers themselves who are operating this own technology out of their own warehouses? Like, who do you envisage being your target market for your technology? And are there any regulatory hurdles to be overcome before you can start deploying your technology?
Yeah, absolutely. Lots of questions in there. I think with market, it's worth for drone delivery, it's a big challenge, and you kind of need to split it into two layers of market, right? One is the market where you get your early operations, you get your flight hours, you kind of prove out the safety of your aircraft. And then market number two is really where, after you've proven out safety, after you can convince regulators, hey, these drones are good to fly in sort of, much riskier classes of airspace. We can, fly them in cities as well, right? That's when, you can, let's say, work with your second class of customers, which are the ones that, will scale you up to millions of deliveries a day. And, that's there, right? I think your sort of your food delivery, your e-commerce, your FedExes, your UPSs, right? Like all of those guys are going to be major players there. So I think the reality is, as a startup, as we're going to be dependent on funding for a while, we need to be working on both fronts. So we do have a couple of contracts sort of for the early stage customers in India, really working with, for instance, one use case that, we've gotten a lot of excitement around is delivery of blood samples. Because there you have to do a lot of reverse logistics. You need to go from the hub to the spoke for pickup and then back to the hub. So essentially, the driver needs to be paid for both ways, just like the drone. Whereas otherwise, you're competing with the driver being paid one way and a drone being paid both ways, which becomes challenging. And unit economics is really, really important when it comes to drone delivery. I mean, when it comes to any delivery, let's be honest. So that's there. I think sort of with the larger customers, we are in conversations with a couple of folks. Really don't want to share the names publicly until it's pen to paper. But yeah, really, really focusing on a lot of these major players in the US that we can work with. I think, as you said, of course, there are serious regulatory barriers to this. I think, like in the United States, one major barrier is so there's this thing called Part 108, which is essentially the rule from the FAA that is going to enable what's BVLOS drone delivery. And BVLOS stands for Beyond Visual Line of Sight. So it basically means you can fly drones further than the operator can see them. And that's obviously really critical for drone delivery because, well, if you need to go in a car to follow the drone, then that kind of defeats the purpose of a drone delivery. So that's really critical, and something that we will just have to wait for. And I think our goal is that we want to really scale up operations as much as we can before then, so that the moment Part 108 comes out, we are a company that is doing sort of many sort of tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of deliveries a day, and we are ready to scale up in the US.
Wow. And is the regulatory environment in India, is it more drone friendly currently than the United States? And do you think that once America wraps its head around this and the FAA gets involved and passes some regulation that's a very clear framework and everybody knows what they have to do to qualify and be permitted, do you think that that will then accelerate global adoption? Because as we see with many things that come out of the United States, once a regulatory decision has been made in the US, many other countries tend to follow suit, not always, but they tend to follow suit or at least use their regulatory framework as a pattern to implement their own version of it in their own country. Europe is a totally different beast. They do their own shit kind of across the board, and they're a totally different regulatory monster. But, how does the US compare with India today? And then secondarily, do you think that their decisions will accelerate global adoption?
Yeah, no, I think these both kind of end up being two sides of the same coin because when you look at major regulatory bodies in the US, right, the FAA, the FDA, all of these guys, these are, I would say, the US is it it moves a lot faster than like some developed economies, but fundamentally the US is a cautious economy, right? They don't want to enable new technologies too quickly at the risk of something going wrong. And so that's where, frankly, right now, nobody has a good framework for drone delivery. There isn't really a single country with, an operator's manual saying, hey, if you do all of these things, you get approved for drone delivery. But there are still a lot of countries which have enabled scale drone delivery, right? That is a solved problem. And that's because they're all running on exemptions. And so the thing is that the FAA is not comfortable giving exemptions at the same rate as a lot of other economies. and nobody can use other economies as a template because it's exemptions. It's not an actual model that other countries can adopt. And so, I mean, of course, right, the position of the US in the economy, the FAA being like one of the major regulatory aviation regulatory bodies in the world, means that once the FAA approves something, like people will take notice. There's a lot of countries in the world where if you're approved by the FAA, you automatically have approval in that country. You don't need to do anything. And
Wow.
for pretty much every other country, if you have FAA approval, that's really going to accelerate the process. So those things are obviously quite important. And the way I see it is, yes, once the US comes out with that framework, then a lot of other countries will follow suit because they can just copy paste, right? And in the end, economies don't like risk, right? They don't like the risk of having to figure this stuff out themselves and potentially getting it wrong. And they're kind of like, well, the US did it, the FAA did it. We're pretty sure they like put in, thoughtful effort and research into it. They're probably not going to enable, drone policy that will like cause a bunch of drones to fall from the sky and, hurt people. So like, if they did it, then it probably works. So we can probably just copy paste it here with like a couple of small changes.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. I mean, even the FAA regulations around, things like paragliders and, paramotors and
Mhm.
ultralights and everything else, most of those regulations are almost carbon copied. New Zealand, Australia, UK, around the world,
Yeah.
Canada. So yeah, I agree with you. I think FAA approval is there any has the FAA given any kind of indicative timeline to putting this forward and getting it approved in any kind? Like, I'm guessing that the election of Donald Trump potentially accelerates this. I mean, he's already made
Mhm.
noises about decreasing regulatory burden and permissions
Yeah.
and permits and all this sort of stuff. So, is there a sense within the community and within the industry that things will speed up under Trump?
Yeah, I think there is a sense of that. Obviously, in the end, everything's just speculation. You don't know inside the head of all the regulators. But I think one good thing is that there are sort of clear timelines towards Part 108. I mean, you know how regulatory bodies are timelines always get sort of overrun. But the FAA does seem to be staying firm on the fact that they will come out with the first draft for public review of Part 108 in January of next year. So quite soon.
That's
Yeah.
exciting.
Yeah, definitely.
Wow. And I mean, I guess at this stage, you are working and you're creating your operational timelines around design, development, build, scale, all that sort of stuff. I'm guessing you're orientating a lot of your timelines around those timelines because you have to necessarily in order for you to get to a place where you can scale the business rapidly. You need a well-defined, well-understood regulatory framework to be able to do that. At the end of the day, you're kind of throwing darts at a dartboard to a degree until you know exactly what things you're going to need to do to comply, right?
Yeah, that's pretty much true. But that being said, I think it becomes very hard to run a company if you're running it at the whims of regulators because, well, it's not just the regulators. You need money to run a company. And that's the unfortunate reality of this world. People don't work for free, and innovation takes a lot of time and money. So I think what's really important for us is that we need to have clear plans on how we're going to operate at scale, how we're going to show traction even if FA timelines overrun, right? I can't be running a company where it's that, well, if the FA kind of just twiddles their thumbs for a year, then we're dead in the water, right? So I think a big part of this is really we want to focus on other core economies, work with policymakers there, get to regulatory approvals so that we can essentially, show a lot of traction outside of the US, right? And I think traction is the key word here. You need to show that people want this service, people are willing to pay for the service, and we are able to operate it at scale. Those are the key things because in the end, this is a volume game. And so, you can fairly reasonably make an argument that, hey, most of the volume and money will be coming from the US. We are waiting for regulators over there. But in the meantime, we have scaled very significantly in all of these other economies. And that just becomes a very strong argument. It puts your company in a strong position and it obviously puts you in the strongest position compared to any other drone delivery company to scale when, regulatory opens up.
And do you ever see yourselves, you may not even know the answer to this yet, do you see yourselves also developing a competing carrier service where you guys actually operate your own carrier network for last mile delivery in tandem and in parallel with the other major carriers globally that do last mile delivery? Do you ever see a scenario where you develop your own carrier network because either maybe you can't get traction fast enough with those other carriers, or maybe they don't want to adopt it globally, or maybe you want to be able to prove out operating your own
Mhm.
delivery network as a POC? Like, there's probably lots of reasons why you may want to operate your own delivery network, but do you see that as a viable route to market, or do you see partnerships as the most viable route to market?
Yeah, I think we definitely see partnerships as the most viable because I would say right now market share is really dominated by the major players. I think the other thing is that sort of we're not too concerned about speed of adoption because I think the reality is that if this works, there will be an incredible amount of speed to adoption, right? If you are, I mean, the whole idea behind this is we're working to create a world when drone delivery costs more than 5 cents. I mean, that's something which every last mile logistics player is going to want to adopt, right? I mean, because if you're the first to it, it gives you a huge leg up on your competitors, both in terms of profitability and the prices you can offer to customers. And second, if everyone else has adopted it, then you're a sitting duck, right? Nobody's going to get deliveries from you anymore when drone delivery becomes the norm. And so that's where we just see ourselves being a core part of this infrastructure that you don't want to be limited by scaling laws to adoption. The great thing about these guys is, well, if you have the physical capacity to scale to 1 million deliveries a day in the next 6 months, and you can prove that out to them, well, then they're going to scale you to 1 million deliveries a day in 6 months because they have that volume just sitting there.
Yeah.
And so that's there, right? You don't have to juggle so many different aspects because once you close one client, then you're like, yep, as long as we can make the drones, as long as we can operate them, as long as it fits into your network, we can scale this up really, really quickly.
And do you see a world where roadside delivery lockers also become commonplace in more urbanized areas where, say, for example, I live, in Pueblo City, Mexico now, and I live in a townhouse complex where I wouldn't be able to have a drone delivery probably to my door. But if just outside the complex at the roadside, there was a drone delivery locker where the drone does the delivery to the top of the locker, it gets ingested into the locker, and then it has a carousel inside the locker where I would just be notified, hey, your locker up the road, your parcel's waiting for you. You go up, you put in a pin code, and out comes your parcel. Do you see a scenario where that makes drone deliveries more scalable in slightly more urbanized environments at low risk, where the delivery is happening to a big giant steel box on the side of the road as opposed to somebody's front door?
No, definitely right. I think the apartment problem is a big challenge because then you're converting the last mile into the last meter problem. And I think there's a lot of different solutions to this with like varying degrees of sort of manual intensity. Where, for instance, let's say you could have one designated person for the entire apartment complex that is just delivering items from like terrace to people's doorstep. You can have like, let's say, locker systems where you need to go to the spot on the roadside or on your terrace to pick up items. Or, if you look at like a very heavy infrastructure world where let's say drone delivery just becomes the norm, this is the way we do things, you can potentially justify infrastructure to, let's say, just connect lockers directly to your doorstep. So let's say you have a little locker inside your apartment. It goes down sort of a series of pipes and it comes straight from your locker to your apartment, right? Because you're only creating a couple meters of infrastructure for all deliveries, right? It won't really work if you're trying to connect it between, locations.
Makes complete sense. Look, this has been a fascinating discussion, and it's been a discussion we've never had on the podcast before. It's super interesting, and I think that, as price inflation continues to increase around the world, and as delivery becomes a greater and greater percentage of the total cost of goods sold, obviously drone technology, basically the cost advantage of drone technology continues to increase. over time, right? As human-based deliveries continue to get more and more expensive, vehicles cost more to run, fuel costs more, basically as everything related with delivery gets more expensive, it feels like in the grand scheme of things, your platform becomes more cost competitive over time, not less. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely right. I think, it's one of those things where over time, as the scales cost of manufacturing is going to go down, operations are going to become more efficient, autonomy is going to move up. So yes, you're moving on the opposite end of the cost curve, where right now as labor prices go up, inflation goes up, the cost of delivery is just increasing year on year. Whereas in our case, it will be dramatically decreasing year on year because it's being enabled by technology and that tech, has a lot of development.
You see a world ultimately, you're still young. I'm 50. It probably won't happen in my lifetime, but you see a time probably in your lifetime where the cost of last mile delivery approaches zero.
I'm hoping you see that in your lifetime. I think that's really our goal. We want to get to a point where it is effectively zero. Yeah.
Wow, that's absolutely incredible. I love your vision. I love your passion. I love your clarity of thought. It's really, really impressive what you guys are developing. I want to keep tabs on you, and I would love to get you back on the podcast another 6, 8, 12 months, see what's developed, see the status of the industry, see what the status of the regulatory environment looks like. Very, very impressive. You should be very proud of yourself. How large is your team? And what is on your next, say, 2 to 6 month roadmap? What's your priorities?
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, we have our team is, about it's 13 of us, 11 engineers, very heavy on engineering.
As
Yeah.
to be expected.
Yeah, definitely. And on our priority list, I think it's really, we're focusing on hiring a lot more great engineers, really figuring out how to get the early stages of manufacturing right, where you're, let's say, doing batch production and you're making, like 200 to 800 aircrafts, kind of figuring out scaling operations, getting an understanding of, how challenging operations are, starting early commercialization, really proving out the viability of this product that, hey, this is not just a drone that flies and looks pretty. This is something that like has generated real economic value.
Wow, I absolutely love it. Now, I will drop a link to your LinkedIn profile as well as parties who want to reach out to have a conversation about technology, maybe even have chats about this incredible stuff you're building.
Yeah, definitely.
So LinkedIn, website, but are those the two best ways to get a hold of you?
Yeah, I think those are really the best ways. I mean, we also have sort of a Twitter and X account. Yeah, happy to share the link to that as well. Yeah.
Absolutely love it. Now, as we come down to the end of our time together, an hour has absolutely flown by. Pardon the pun. Look, this has been a great conversation. Now, this is where I get to flip the script. I get to turn the microphone over to you. I get to let you ask me one question. Any question you like can be personal or professional. So, Mr. Naman Pushp from Airbound, what is your question for me today?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think you'd mentioned a bit about your whole history with helicopters and all. Would love to hear a bit more about that. And I feel like just that's probably something your viewers haven't really heard much about either.
Yeah, no, they haven't, and this was in New Zealand. I grew up in Southern California, lived in New Zealand for almost 30 years, and then for the last year and a half, I've been living in Mexico. And, going back, 15 or so years ago, I was really heavily into the RC helicopter sport. We were doing 3D aerobatic competitions. I was part of the Model Aircraft Association, was the president for a while in New Zealand. Very, very interesting, cool space for sure. Went over to IRCHA in the United States one year, saw all the competitive flights happening there. Very, very cool industry, very interesting industry, very challenging,
Mhm.
of all types of RC vehicles or devices. I think RC helicopters are probably the most challenging or amongst the most challenging to learn how to build, learn how to fly, learn how to maintain, learn how to be safe, all that sort of stuff. But technology advanced really, really fast, particularly in the last couple of years that I was in the industry, where we went from nitro powered, methanol-based engines to largely electric-based models instead. And so the learning curve of being able to, set up the engines and the mixtures, and they were glow-based engines. And so to go from that and to see the flight control technology advance as quickly as the power supply, methodology, I think that was the most interesting thing to watch, because flight controls became super advanced. Gyro technology became super advanced. Fly bars completely went away from the aircraft, which meant that if you did crash, there was a lot less stuff getting damaged on the helicopter. The ability to have very fast charge batteries, not as fast as refilling a fuel tank on a glow engine, but certainly super fast charge battery technology became commonplace. The price of battery technology came down dramatically to where now, yes, you can still get glow engines, but as a finger in the air, I'd say that 80-90% of the now is all electric. So massive change to the industry. A lot of people that were originally into helicopters have gotten more into drone technology now. Drone racing became really commonplace towards the tail end of my time in the industry. So some super interesting developments. And I think, it definitely, hobbyists helped to create the market for a lot of this stuff. And they through design, through very smart people creating their own embedded device technology, flight control technology, like there was a lot of hobbyists that helped to turn this into mainstream accessible stuff. And I think that's a very cool part of the history of flight is RC flight really has helped to push the entire industry forward in a significant way is my take on it.
Yeah, definitely. I think that makes a lot of sense. It was really interesting also, hearing from you on, the things that are developed, because I mean, I entered this world a lot more recently than you did. So, a lot of things that are kind of just like commonplace and expected from me, were like revolutionary for you. And it's really interesting seeing that, like 3D gyros and all is just like stuff we take for granted these days. It's just like a part and parcel of building an aircraft.
Totally. Well, listen, this has been a fabulous conversation. I really appreciate your time with me today, and I can't wait to speak to you again soon. Are you a B2B or D2C e-commerce merchant? Then head over to greenwoodconsulting.net to learn how we can help you scale your business.